Greetings, everybody. My name is Erin Bryant Thomas. I'm a wife and a mother of 3 boys. I'm an anti-racist community organizer. I organize with the Village of Hope, People's Institute, Black Star Line, and I work with King County Regional Homelessness Authority as their Director of Equity and Justice. It's good to be here.
Hello, my name is Chris Anderson. I'm co-founder of Think Ideas, Artist and Activism, and we specialize in amplifying the voices of residents in Snohomish County that are underrepresented, and we do it through mixed media arts and music.
Nice.
And my name is Sean Good. I'm married to the most amazing woman in the world. I have 2 incredible children, a 20-year-old son who's a sophomore at Central Washington University, and a 14-year-old daughter who's a freshman. I steward Choose 180 as our executive director, where we work to transform systems that cause harm and support the young people who have been impacted by them. And I'm grateful to be sharing space with the both of you today.
Awesome.
You know, when we consider the report and the community identified approaches, the 2 that really resonate for me are, one, focusing on the people and not the systems, and addressing the root causes instead of the symptoms, right? And I think for me in particular, those 2 stand out because I'm regularly talking about how systems are amoral. And that's complicated for some folks, because we say systems are evil, right? Mm-hmm. There's like these systems are created to cause harm, but it's my conviction that it's the variables within the systems that dictate the outcomes. And if we change the variables, then we change the outcome.
Yeah.
And even if we have fixed variables, if one of the actors begins to respond differently, then we can still get to different outcomes. And so we have to focus on the people within the systems to dictate the outcomes. Yeah. Because even if we envision a world with a different system, if we end up with the wrong actors in those places, we'll get outcomes that cause harm. It'll just be harm that'll look different.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's something to be looked into versus if you just take white males at traffic stops versus black males at traffic stops. One of the groups has a higher rate of death than the other, and is it because one's more hostile, or we have to figure out, is it the process of the traffic stop, or is it the individual making the traffic stop and their perceptions going into that traffic stop that leads them to drastic situations at our demise, as a certain racial group.
Yeah, and take that as an example, right? I think if we talk about policing, particularly in the lens of public safety, that we can have the good officer, bad officer conversation. And if we get mired into that as the single variable that has the greatest balance in what the outcome is, we can kind of get lost in the sauce, right? Because we all know people who have served the community and have put on that uniform and have done it from a place of wanting to really authentically and intentionally engage. And yet we still see the system of policing disproportionately causing harm. But I think it's you add like individual officer plus culture of policing, and then you get this given outcome, right? And so it takes an exceptional person serving in that space to overcome the imbalance of the culture that traditionally produces outcomes that cause disproportionate harm to communities like ours, right? Yeah. Which is why it gets back into that second point that really resonates for me about focusing on not the grandiose bigger thing, but what are the practical on the ground impacts that are happening that are contributing to the larger systemic woes, right? And how often are we dealing with the symptoms of what's happening and not dealing with the actual manifestation of harm, right? And we see it in public health, we see it in violence reduction efforts, we see it in how we address the folks who are living unhoused in our community, right? We stay surface and we stay symptoms because it's easier to trim the tree, right, than to deal with the fact that the soil that is growing out of needs to be healed.
Yeah, one of the things that came out of the report that I wanted to lift up is that ensuring that education systems are preparing our young people for the world that they live in. And so exactly the example that you gave, just around how they show up when they encounter adverse experiences, but not only adverse experiences, really educating our young people around who they are, where they came from, helping them develop a strong sense of self and their identity, and really, allowing our young people to really practice different ways of I think about conflict, right? So dealing with conflict, and making sure our young people are equipped with the skill set that they need to navigate. We are talking about Black children, and our children need to know the real. I feel strongly about our young people, being politicized, being heavily educated about, their history, and all the things. So I can go on and on and on, but I love that, ensuring that our education system really takes a solid approach around making sure that they have what they need to really navigate this very complex world that we live in.
On the issue of the report and when it's introduced and the information from it and when it's presented, what do you think, like not our counterparts, but people who would deny this information, what would you think their stance would be at this point?
That's a really good question, Chris. I wonder, when I think about audience, right? I think the first people who really need to dive into the report is us.
Our community?
Yeah. Because I think we have a lot of trauma that we are struggling to heal from, that keep us from having not even a consensus, right, where we stand as a monolith. I don't mean it like that, because white dominant culture regularly wants to position us as a monolith, but where we have agreements, where we can conceptualize that here is the language that we use together moving forward, even if that language produces a diversity of perspectives and action items and agendas. And here's some agreeable language that we can move forward on. And I think that language is reflected in the report. And I think it's for us first.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Chris, even as we talk about this report and we talk about public safety, I'm really curious about some of the ways that you use art to create safe communities. Can you talk a bit about that?
Our organization, a branch of it, Artists in Activism, wanted to create musical and visual displays of protest and untraditional forms of protesting. And so we use music as a vehicle because we felt music could break down the barrier of distrust or and kind of open up the bridge for communication. And once we created that bridge through art, we can then introduce, other avenues of understanding and open-mindedness for people to even consider. In some aspects, it's like, I'm conflicted a little with having to go as far as to use an art form just to express myself, to come across as an individual to someone. But it's also art, and it's expressive. So it's a give and take. It's a tug of war,
Well, it makes me think of, like, as a people, we've been using art as a form of protest forever. I think about Congo Square, right, in New Orleans, and how on Sundays they would put all of the enslaved folks out, and we would congregate, and we would sit in our own groups and our own tribes, as we were connected still to that part of our culture, and we would dance and we would play music and we would do it in a manner that honored the integrity of who we are. Almost in protest of what it is that we are subjugated to throughout the rest of the week. And we do it in such a way that it would draw a dominant culture from beyond their gates and have them tipping and dipping into our spaces because they were enticed by what it is they couldn't understand.
I'm actually doing a live music protest version of that on First and Pike downtown, and residents and city officials and some business owners don't like what I'm doing. But if you took a poll, it would be 10% that don't like what I'm doing, 90% loves what I'm doing. But it also showcases that we have a certain power within us, and it's contagious, it's energetic, and there's a group that doesn't want, us to unite and really find our true self of community. And once our community unites, like, we change the world. Like, our culture is why you have a kid in Iraq with the Tupac shirt on, running in the street.
Yeah.
We influence everybody. So, but if, like you said, this information is for us. If we, as a community, get on the same page,
Yeah.
Unity.
sky's the limit.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hey, Aaron, as we talk about public safety, right, and Chris's activism through musical protest, what is it you dream about?
Yeah, thank you for that. Raising three beautiful black, brilliant boys, I dream a lot about just having fun, very simple fun. I dream about them just playing outside, freely, running up and down the street. I dream about ease of travel. I dream about how we engage with our young people, how we can better engage with young people. I dream about, I mentioned before, becoming really skillful in parenting, my parenting ways, but also becoming really skillful and teaching my children the skill set around resolving issues. You can imagine having 3 boys, 3 different personalities, so really teaching them to how to work things out. I dream about disrupting fear-based parenting. I think that is the root to a lot of the trauma our babies have experienced, and just as a parent, that is something that I dream about. I read a lot of books. I'm in several different spaces where I can start to heal from things that I've learned and internalized, and really practice a different way of being. And so really undoing what's been done is what I dream about.
I hold the dream of healing from that trauma. I think about the trauma that I've had the fortune to survive in life, and in the areas where it's held me back, because I'm still walking in my woundedness. Whether it's woundedness from growing up multiracial and super light and wanting to prove like my blackness, and then how does that play out in the way that I show up in spaces, wanting to reinforce like how black I really am, right? Or the woundedness around like the trauma from my father, right? And the mistrust that I've had and the distrust that I've carried towards black men, particularly older black men, and like needing to heal from those things in order to actually be able to authentically engage community, let alone like functionally parent and be a husband in a way that's not perpetuating the same harm that was put upon me, right? Like that's the dream I carry. I dream of living in a community that engages people in healing the moment that harm has occurred, where we're not looking to combat harm with harm, as if we were really going to be able to put out that fire with a fire, but like intentionally healing at the moment that harm has happened. That's what I dream of.
I appreciate the question around dreaming. I have a lot of sleepless nights, and I that's why I appreciate the work that people do to create things like this report, and for folks that find ways to establish themselves in the community, because we need things that we can connect to as parents, because there's only so much that we can do within our family unit that we can provide to our boys, right, and to our children just in general. And so, the exposure of music that you provide in the work that you do, that outlet, that access, is what my family needs and what so many families need, because our children, they receive so many messages from us, but also externally at school or just, whatever spaces they're in. And, they need ways to process. They need folks, and I would say Black men, to process all the things. My son just a couple weeks ago asked me, just driving in the car, Mom, I think I need a therapist, right? And I'm like, like, what's happening? What's going on? But then I'm like, Aaron, chill, be at ease with my response, listen. And so talked about anger and sadness. And I was like, man, and you think as parents, you're giving them everything, but there are also things that they're experiencing out in the world that, that it causes a lot of confusion, a lot of it's so complex, and they need that touchdown space and that space to connect outside of their homes to tap in with other folks, so just so appreciate the work that you do around art and music, because that's one of the most beautiful outlets,
I think now that with organizations like your organization Choose 180 and organizations like Black Future Co-op, the dreams we all share, we can make them a reality based on these community works we do together, and that can create this future dream that really supports the dream that you have, versus I think the people that have came before us, or even the groups that supposedly say they represent us in these efforts. So I think we're on the verge of a revolution of change when it comes to the support system our community really needs. And that, I think that dream will fund all of ours. Not fun, but fuel,
Fuel and fun.
I'm thrilled because, and when you talk about these nightmares, the first thing came to mind for me was the best way to recognize you're in a nightmare is to remember what your reality is. Right? And I can think about being in a nightmare and being like, this isn't real, this isn't real, this isn't real. And how difficult it is to tell yourself that this isn't real when nothing else exists. But as we create the world that we need to live in, and we continue to foster those healing environments, we have a stronger narrative when those nightmares begin to manifest themselves, to combat them with a truth that this isn't real.
Ashe.
When I think about all the spaces that we organize in, you are in a really unique part of our region in Snohomish County. And you've been there for how long?
About 5 to 6 years,
Yeah, tell me about the changes that you've seen in that part of our region since you've been around, and how some of the work you're involved in now has been a catalyst to see even more changes to center our experience.
So Snohomish County's, it's really white, and it's small percentage of Black folks in Snohomish County. It's I think 4, not even 6%. What's crazy is 16% of those people are represented in jail, in the Snohomish County Jail, which is crazy. So the small Black community is very small and to themselves, and quiet is kept, and we don't want no trouble. And so when I moved in to Snohomish County, it was during Trump was in office, and so the white community, they were proud. They were flying their flags. They were, posters everywhere. And so around the incidents leading up to George Floyd and that era that we went into, the Black community and that community, it was tense.
Yeah.
It was heavy. So we started protesting. And we would get counter protesters at our protests. I mean, it was the guys with the big trucks and the machine guns, and like
Wow.
they were like in vests, and so it was crazy, man. But we just continued to play, and we would have conversations with them on top of the roof, and we would agree with certain things, and then we would disagree on other things. But I think that experience brought us to the point where we could have that conversation. So I think art and alternative means of communication is definitely needed to get to the next step.
Yeah. It's that the things that let you sit in that tension and find common ground, right? Like when you're, I think there's a time for shouting, and that's necessary, right? And then there's a time for coming together.
Yeah.
Right? And one of the things I think is really impressive is like the ability to create a safe space, not only for yourself, but for folks who would stand vehemently opposed to your position, so much so they show up with their AR-15s and their bulletproof vests, and those same people being willing to lean in and discover common ground, right? That type of emotional labor, I feel like, is often unfairly put on us to foster, and yet, like, the fruit that comes from it is creating new safe space that may have not otherwise existed for us and our young people.
From that situation of the protests in Marysville, we were able to create this relationship with the Snohomish Sheriff's Department where their lead sheriff is like looked at as a really bad guy. And he reached out to us to start a conversation about what was needed to mend the relationship with his department and the Black community. And I thought that was telling in the way we presented, our approach. And I don't think without our approach, we wouldn't have got that opportunity to even have that conversation with them.
Yeah. I think what speaks out to me, and like I really want to hear from you, Aaron, about like what it is you've experienced. One of the things that I hear too is that like there's a diversity of approaches, and not any of them are bad, right? Like I think absent of them, like the approaches that don't garner the conversation actually create space for the approaches that do garner the conversation, right? Like it's those that push so hard that folks are like, I'm not going to talk to them, that then create the middle ground for a conversation to actually be held, right? Which then opens up a broader conversation to include more people as we continue to journey together. It's one of the things that I've seen a ton of is a conflict in narrative about right approach or right way, when we're really all engaged in a collective action with a heart set towards liberty for our people, which we know comes at a cost where there has to be liberty for all people.
Yeah, I agree. I think the naysayers on different approaches, if they don't like a new approach, they should just present their approaches that have represented us for the past 60, 70 years and tell us why their approaches work and why our approaches don't.
And what I'd offer is that if we're not careful, we'll begin to position ourselves adversarially, and in doing so, be responding out of our trauma and our woundedness, which is rooted like in not a way of like healing to come back, right? But a desire to push forward in spite of, right? And I know for me, whenever I start moving in spite, I'm not moving from a healed place. I'm moving from a wounded place. Like, you're calling out my approach in such a way that like, I'm not gonna mess with y'all, so I'm just gonna go ahead and push past y'all. Instead of like, we're gonna continue to move this thing forward and create space to do it together if you wanna come, right? Like, I think that some of those nuances we miss because we don't actually understand how this thing that's happening over here is benefiting us over here because we're sitting in the place of beneficiary. And I don't think any of our actions are to waste, right? Because if we start looking at the history books, we look at organizing actions and we think about like SNCC, right? And the student nonviolent, right? And like there was a whole bunch of naysayers to that approach, right? And people were beefing with the way Dr. King was mobilizing, right? And thinking that the nonviolent passiveness wasn't going to be the way forward. right? And then there was, you know, people in camps juxtaposition to those. Like this type of internal conflict on the right way has always existed. And yet, when we are liberated, all of us benefit from the liberty.
That's it.
And so in my mind, I often think of it like as Steve mentioned, pressure on, pressure off, pressure on, pressure off. And without those that are applying the pressure,
that's right.
there's no space for those of us who release the pressure. And if we operate with intentionality and synchronicity, oh man, we can get this thing way up the rails in ways that we never imagined.
Yeah.
And
I was gonna say, and I love the disruption of dichotomous thinking that it has to be one way or the other, but making space for all the gray.
Yeah.
And you know, one of the things that I realized in just my short period of time with doing, you know, community organizing the past 5 years, is that the point you made around operating from an unhealed space can really set the work back. And so we've done a lot of intentional work around base building, so really building a base where you are accountable, where people can hold you accountable, where people can call you in, where you draw strength. And then also, you know, we've had, you know, summers of healing, you know, so the whole July where we're coming together doing camping trips with our babies and bringing all of our families together, having what we call communiversity. So again, when I talked about politicizing our children, but making sure that everybody has a level of you know, a strong knowledge base of history, what's been done unto you. And so, and just thinking about how taking time to think about how you've been harmed and the trauma that you've been through, and working with people who look like you too, right? I think that's something that we've heard over the years is I want to work with somebody that looks like me. I want somebody to talk to, or I want a teacher that looks like me. I want a therapist that looks like me. I want a doctor that looks like me, you know? So I've seen so much growth and so many of our Black folks stepping into that space and really stepping into being our community healers, whether official or unofficial. And so that's one of the things that I've seen grow out of the last couple of years is folks really leaning in and really recognizing that, you know, government, they ain't gonna save us. And how we have to come together to make sure we have what we need, and really truly believing that, truly believing that. And then also I heard, you know, some things as we conversed, like the manifestations of internalized racial oppression. And for Black folks and folks of color, we experience the inferiority side of it. So all the manifestations, you talk about colorism, self-doubt, self-hate, you know, there's so many manifestations, and that gets in the way if we don't know what it is, and if we don't check it, it gets in the way of our interpersonal relationships. And so, but I've seen very intentional work being done to address that and to undo that as well. So, just have a huge appreciation for, you know, really the Undoing Racism work, you know, and the relationship that we have with the People's Institute, with this region in particular, over 25 plus years, with them bringing that analysis and really helping us as all of these newly emerging Black organizations, you know, are surfacing and really stepping in and stepping up, because we have realized that, you know, police, our judicial system, our education system, our healthcare, all of these systems have failed us. And so what I've recognized is that we are reclaiming our space. We are taking our responsibilities seriously, you know, and that's one of the things that I too had to get in check. The brothers from the Black Prisoners Caucus really helped me understand that. Is that I have a huge responsibility as a mother. You know, I can't just send my babies to school and think that they're going to equip them with what they need. And so, just that's one of the things that I've realized over time, and also that Black folks are starting to get clear. I'm going to read a quote that I would love to see what generates from this quote. But it's one that has grounded me for some time now. It simply states, every system and every institution in the United States was created originally and was designed and structured legally and intentionally to serve white people exclusively. And so for me, every space that I step in, I keep that at the forefront, because I have to make sure that my involvement, my advocacy, any and everything that I'm a part of elevates Black folks.
Yeah.
Our babies, for sure, but Black people all along, the spectrum, people of African descent. Because if we don't, who will?
Yeah.
And so I just would, based on, just hearing that quote, what comes to mind, for you all when you hear that? And I can read it again if you want.
I think one of the things that resonates for me is that, particularly over the past 5, 6, 7 years, not only has that quote become less revolutionary, it's become co-opted by dominant culture in their revelation. But dominant culture has such an addiction to consumption.
Of course.
That it's kind of oh yeah, everything is centered around our existence. We should do something about that. But oh, can we go through this drive-through real quick? Right? Because it's just convenient, right?
Nope.
And when you're part of dominant culture, right? Satiating yourself on white supremacy is just so accessible and so convenient. So it's right there for you. And when you live in a part of the country where your state has only 3% Black folks, and the county is roughly 8%, you can be seduced by being adjacent to dominant culture in a way where you think you can benefit from some of the same supremacist ideals.
That's right.
Right? Absent of an analysis of a true caste system that we live within this country, you can begin to think that you can climb the social ladder by being more proximate to dominant culture and positioning yourself in a way where you're more aligned with their values. And at the end of the day, when you become subject to those very same systems that cause harm, those same inequities will be put upon you.
That's
because you can't live beyond the caste system that you were born into in this country.
That's right.
So yeah, absolutely. And I as I steward a nonprofit organization, as often as people will listen to me, I will tell them that we only exist because harm exists. And that we need to be actively working ourselves out of an organization because the harm shouldn't be present.
That's right.
And if we exist in perpetuity, that means I'm creating a future where harm will always be there for the young people who we're called to serve. And that's backwards and sadistically altruistic. And that is not a way forward, because all of these constructs are grounded and rooted in a way to lift up white supremacy. The last thing I'll say is in this public health class, and we were talking about evidence-based programs. And this whole mechanism that once you become an evidence-based program, then you're able to apply for funding at the government level and get resourced in new ways, and you're added to this booklet of programs that are evidence-based. And what I asked them to consider is, let's think historically how evidence-based practices haven't benefited Black folks.
That's right.
There was evidence-based practices that were measuring the size of our skulls to determine our intelligence. There was evidence-based practices that was measuring the thickness of our skin to determine our pain threshold.
Hello.
Right? So just because something has evidence behind it also doesn't mean that the practice of procuring it isn't rooted in the same dominant culture that was created to build negative outcomes for the people that the program was intended to serve. And with all of that said, right?
Yeah.
The only way we're going to see ourselves out of this is through partnership with each other and with others outside of this space. Chris, in the work that you're leaning into, you've already identified one unique partner in the Sheriff's Department. But what are other partnerships that you see that you either need or you have that are helping create this vision of activism through art that you had the privilege to steward?
Well, we're actually trying to create a multimedia hub where individuals of the Black community in Snohomish County can come in and express themselves through arts and medias, whether it be podcasts, video, art, food, sculpting, providing trade courses and things like that. So tech companies, companies or organizations that specialize in reentry programs from the penal system, youth advocacy, avenues like that, deterrence that way. So organizations like yourself, man, we could partner and do some amazing stuff where you're based and abroad. I think creating that community of each other, bringing an awareness of us is a real good bridge,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, creating an awareness of us. I love how you just said that. That's one of the most critical pieces. You got to talk about the work that you do to everybody, at the schools, the churches, at the courthouse, wherever, because people need to know that you are out there and how to tap in. And then, I think about partnerships. I think about just unity, I know there are so many organizations that emerged from, the organizing behind the murder of George Floyd, right? And there was a lot of dollars that came out, and just imagine what it could have looked like for us to bring all that brilliance, together. And one of the things that I've got an opportunity to witness is the work that Yolanda McGee is doing with the Best Start for Kids, King County Best Start for Kids, Liberated Village. And so there's, some funding to do work with, I believe it's a cohort 12 to 24, maybe a younger cohort. I'm not sure which cohort she managed, but, they come together and they talk about their different programs and strategies. And I think that when we come together with a village kind of mindset, village meaning that everyone has a place, from the youngest, the baby in the community, to the elder in the community. Everybody has a place. Everybody has a responsibility. And we need more cultivation of that. And partnerships, I'm hearing more and more, of that term being used. But I think one of the greatest ways to do that is, picking up the phone and, having conversation over dinner, coffee, but just not just with the folks who may be funding the work. Bringing it to, our babies. My babies are 11, 9, and 6, right? And so they should have a full understanding of what it is that you do. You know what I mean? And how do you talk about the work? And how can people tap in? Yeah. So I am so excited about, the cultivation of more partnerships. I've seen more of the funding opportunities, the different grants that are out there that are encouraging people to do more partnership, which I'm excited about. But we have to practice more of the Kwanzaa principles, right? The unity and the Kujichagulia, self-determination, and just all that collaboration, and not feel like we have to compete with one another. Because that's another manifestation of dominant culture. We don't have to compete with one another. We really work better together. And so I'm excited to have been a part of that work in these last couple of years, and just see where we go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we substitute the word partnership for relationship.
There we go.
Right, because partnership seems so transactional for me, and I need to be in relationship.
There we go.
Right,
that's it.
Where there's a shared benefit that's not measured by how much, right, but by how far. Right.
That's good.
And I need to be in relationship with you.
Yes.
I need to be in relationship with you. Right?
Absolutely.
I need to be in relationship with all of you, right? And we need the collective us, because there is no greater force than us together.
That's right.
And bringing all of our unique, exceptional talents into a shared space and allowing that to demystify the narrative of scarcity.
Yeah.
Because the assets that are built into our divine design, that have allowed us to survive centuries in a country that was not designed for us to thrive in the way that we have, all of that inside of our DNA, all of that encoded within our being, we have enough.
We do.
We have all that we need.
We do.
We simply need to bring it together and journey together with great intentionality.
Ashe.
And I believe for me, that's what I need. And I'd be willing to say that's what we need.
Ashe.
I agree.
I agree.
Well, this was great, guys.
Oh,
It's
Chris,
been
man,
a
thank
yeah,
you.
it's
Yeah.
been a
Appreciate you, brother.
pleasure.
Yes.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Appreciate you.
Yes.
Appreciate you. Yes, yes, yes.